Kathleen. Thank you. Good morning in your case. It's not good afternoon. You are more awake than we are, but we'll promise we will follow. Okay, so kindly introduce yourselves and your biography, and then you can take us through your presentation. When there are 5 minutes left, I will shout. Okay.
Okay, thank you, George. Okay, hello, and thank you for attending our session called Using Self-Assessment in ESL Pronunciation Classes. My name is Kathleen Brennan, and this is my colleague, Emily Rosales. Emily and I have been teaching credited speech perception and pronunciation courses for about 20 years at the Language School at the University of Quebec in Montreal. Isabelle Wouters is a PhD candidate in the Second Language Didactics Department at UQAM, and Paul John is an associate professor at the University of Quebec in Trois-Rivières. I now turn the floor over to Emily to start us off.
So thank you, Kathleen. So let's start by talking about self-monitoring, which is basically a person's moment-by-moment awareness of the likelihood of maintaining a skill correctly to act appropriately in a particular situation. Research from Harrison Brown shows that self-monitoring in learners is often shaped by their own observations and intuitions. So one challenge is that inaccurate intuitions may lead students to overgeneralize concepts. Another challenge is that self-monitoring may be based on incorrect assumptions. For example, they may sometimes misunderstand the teacher's expectations or their criteria. Also, feedback from peers may be inaccurate, wrong, or biased, especially when encouraging or trying not to hurt another person's feelings. So in these cases, learners may inaccurately evaluate their real abilities and maintain unrealistic expectations, thus distracting them from dedicating valuable time and energy on their weaknesses. Learners then may lose their motivation or develop negative attitudes towards learning. So students may even resist helpful feedback to avoid certain tasks if they feel that their ego is being threatened. As a result, all of these situations prevent students from learning new skills. So students can run the risk of hitting a plateau and developing fossilized habits. As such, there can be negative consequences if students are left to their own devices in any learning task. So now let's look at how self-assessment, the focus of our talk, may help the teacher respond to these challenges. So in self-assessment, learners globally judge their own abilities through awareness-raising activities. Because the teacher guides the student in self-assessment, learners are not left to monitor their learning outcomes on their own. Some self-assessment studies show that this type of formative assessment seems to have a positive impact on learning. However, self-assessment is nonetheless a skill that still needs to be modeled explicitly, taught, and learned. So let's now look at one particular skill that's very difficult to acquire, and that's L2 pronunciation. So research has shown that for adult language learners, L2 pronunciation is very resistant to change. Erroneous articulatory habits have become fossilized and thus are difficult to overcome. Researchers have also reported that some language teachers may feel that they lack the training required to instruct their students in L2 pronunciation and correct their errors. As such, there's often not enough focus on pronunciation instruction in the language classroom, despite an ever-increasing amount of innovative research and pedagogical technologies, strategies, and different tools that are available. So how does self-monitoring apply directly to L2 pronunciation? So research shows that students have trouble evaluating their own pronunciation. In fact, research by Derwing and Rossiter show that prior to pronunciation training, learners tend to report segmental difficulties and are less aware of their suprasegmental ones. Even with teacher feedback, learners may still feel unsure of how to correct themselves in order to go from their present level of skill to the teacher's standard of performance. Another challenge of self-monitoring involves the trade-off of limited attentional resources. Given the many segmental and suprasegmental aspects of pronunciation to simultaneously attend to, the high demand on attention, means that learners can only focus on some aspects at once to the detriment of others. So what do learners need to know to better self-monitor their pronunciation? Activities that raise their awareness are very important. For example, metalinguistic awareness of different rules, such as particular sound spelling correspondences, are helpful. Awareness training should also include developing articulatory and perceptual proprioceptive skills, such as gently feeling the tongue between the teeth for the TH sound, but most importantly, attending to those very important acoustic cues, such as producing a stream of air for the H sound and listening for that aspect during performance. So studies on self-assessment have shown improvement on vowels and on suprasegmentals. So our goal in the present study is to determine if self-assessment can improve the pronunciation of English consonants. Several studies have shown that L2 learners of English tend to substitute the alveolar td or sz for both the voiceless and voiced interdental consonants th, so that think that sounds like tink dat or sink zat. As an aside, for the rest of the presentation, we'll be referring to the voiceless th as theta and the voiced th as eth. So to continue, some L2 students, especially native French speakers, tend to delete the H phoneme so that the word like heart sounds like art. And in some cases, they may insert an H sound before a vowel, such as happle. So I'll give the floor back to my colleague, Kathleen, who will describe our current study.
Okay, so our research project was inspired by a study by Wouters and John 2020. They looked at whether learners are able to detect their own pronunciation of TH and H, and they found that learners were able to identify their errors, and that errors on H were better perceived than errors on TH. And within the H errors, learners were better able to hear those involving H epenthesis than H deletion. So learners are indeed able to detect their own errors in pronunciation. So building on the Wouters and John study, we wanted to test whether self-assessment activities could serve to improve learners' pronunciation of TH and H. Participants of varying proficiency levels completed a pre and post test consisting of 40 short phrases, and those were including words that incorporated those sounds. The test groups completed weekly self-assessment activities targeting various aspects of pronunciation, including, of course, the TH and H sounds. And the control groups did not have the weekly self-assessment component. So results did not show significant differences between the pre and post-test performance, nor were there any significant differences between the test and control groups. Nonetheless, there were differences between test items. It was found that TH substitution errors were more frequent than H insertion errors, and that's a finding that was in accordance with what Wouters and John found, where their students had more trouble hearing the TH sounds compared to their H errors. So in the study that we're reporting on today, we extend this research by examining performance in longer sentences. So because the phrase data didn't show significant differences, we thought that this might have been because these were short phrases and they were quite easy to pronounce, especially for the advanced learners. Maybe even affording both test and control groups time to use metalinguistic knowledge in their production. Perhaps if we challenged them with a more difficult task, we could see improvement afforded by the self-assessment tasks. Therefore, we included sentence stimuli in the pre and post test. And we report on the results from our pronunciation 3 groups in this presentation. In other words, the advanced learners. Data from lower level learners has yet to be analyzed. So data from this study comes from 3 of our Pronunciation 3 classes. So again, these are advanced pronunciation classes. There were 22 students who participated, 12 francophones, and 10 with other language backgrounds. And for the non-francophones, French was either their second or additional language. And the test and control groups each had 11 participants. So here we see the stimuli that was used in the pre and post tests. These tests consisted of 25 sentences of varying length and composed of high frequency words that we expected would elicit errors with TH and H. So here are some examples of the sentences that were used with the target segments in orange. 2 experienced pronunciation instructors rated consonant accuracy in all sentences, and a 3rd instructor settled cases of disagreement. All raters were native English speakers. So the rate of agreement was very high, as you can see, and ranging from 90.6% to 99.8% depending on the segment. So we collected the data that students recorded using an online platform called Learning Branch, and students recorded the pre-test at the beginning of the semester and the post-test at the end of the semester. And most participants also took part in a guided interview at the end of the semester. Okay, so throughout the semester, the test group completed 10 low-stakes self-assessments in which they recorded themselves reading a text, then they listened to a model, and next they analyzed their performance by comparing their production to that of the model. The self-assessments guided them in progressively more comprehensive weekly self-evaluations. The instructor subsequently commented on their self-evaluations, and that, as I mentioned earlier, the control group was not assigned the self-assessment activities. Okay, so here are the results. Okay, so this graph compares the pronunciation errors made by the test group, which are the blue bars, okay, versus the control group, which are the yellow bars. And in addition, performance in pre-test is shown by the darker bars compared to the performance in post-test, which is shown by the lighter bars. We can see that both the test and control groups had fewer errors in the post-test compared to pre-test. So you can see it goes down here and here, except for eth substitution. So for H deletion and theta substitution, the control group was actually weaker than the test group in pre-test. You can see that here. But they made considerable improvement in post-test. Significantly so for the theta, as you can see by the red square here. For eth substitution, the control group remained the same in post-test, while the test group actually had more errors in post-test. So this led to a significant difference in error rates between the test and control groups in post-test. There was also a significance between error types. So for both groups in pre-test, theta substitution errors were significantly higher than both the H errors. And this was maintained in post-test, reaching significance for the eth substitution versus H errors. Okay, so in summary, the pre and post-test data did not show any significant differences between the test and control groups, except that the test group actually had more errors on eth than post-test, the opposite of what was predicted. However, both test and control groups did improve on H and theta. Looking at the error types, we see that the TH errors were more numerous than the H errors for both groups. And the results from these sentence data thus resemble the phrase data that we reported in our previous study. So if we look at the qualitative results from the guided interviews, Comments from the interviews suggest that learners viewed self-assessment in a positive light and considered the activities with teacher feedback to be useful. Many found the activities difficult at first, but were able to develop their skills over time, empowering them to extend this type of self-monitoring to their daily lives. Self-assessment helped raise awareness of their pronunciation strengths and weaknesses, and interestingly, several participants noted that they paid more attention to supersegmentals than to segmentals, and we'll come back to this in a moment. All in all, participants felt that their English pronunciation had improved thanks to self-assessment. And for those of you who are interested, the comments are in the appendix at the end of this PowerPoint. Okay, so let's look now more closely at the quantitative results and the differences in error types. First of all, we found that...
5 minutes left, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so first of all, we found that learners made more errors overall on TH than H. So why may this be so? Well, for one, errors on TH involve substituting one segment for the other, while errors on H involve adding or deleting an entire segment. So it may be that it's easier to overcome these insertion-deletion errors than it is to overcome substitution errors. As well, we speculate that substitution errors may be more likely to fossilize, and this is all the more likely given that the pre- and post-test stimuli consisted of high-frequency words, meaning that they are acquired early and thus potentially mispronounced for a long time. So a puzzling finding was that the test group actually had more errors on EV in post-test, whereas the control group did not. This may be because the self-assessment group received conflicting information. The teacher told students not to focus on EV in function words such as a definite article the. The reasoning being that focusing on EV in function words usually causes learners to stress them, which disrupts sentence rhythm. Thus, instruction to ignore EV conflicted with the self-assessments, which directed students' attention to EV. So this might have led to some confusion, possibly contributing to the increased errors in post-test. Finally, we have seen that there were more errors on EV than theta, and this difference is likely due to the low perceptual saliency of EV versus theta, partly manifested in the longer duration of theta versus EV. Note that the weak saliency of EV is also reflected in the low inter-rater agreement on EV pronunciation, which had the lowest inter-rater agreement at 90% compared to the other error types. Okay, so given that there was no advantage for the test group compared to the control group, what does this say about the value of self-assessment activities? Could it be that there's no real benefit to self-assessment and that pronunciation teaching in itself is sufficient to help students improve? If so, then why does previous research show that self-assessment activities involving vowels and supersegmentals are helpful? Maybe is it that consonants are resistant to improvement through self-assessment? Or maybe not. As previously mentioned, comments from the interviews indicated that students tended to pay attention more to supersegmentals than to segmentals. Thus, it may be that learners cannot attend to both due to limited cognitive resources. Furthermore, as During and Rossiter point out, naive students, when asked what their pronunciation problems were, overwhelmingly responded that they had problems with segmentals, including TH. So it may be that before receiving pronunciation training, students are unaware of the supersegmental aspects of pronunciation. And once they receive instruction on the prosodic elements of English, this new awareness may motivate them to direct their focus to supersegmentals at the expense of segmentals. Now Emily will discuss some ways in which self-assessment might be improved.
So thank you, Kathleen. So how can you improve your self-assessment activities for your students? So according to Brown and Harris, you can start by assigning frequent, well-structured self-assessment activities with clear criteria and guidelines against which your students can monitor and measure their own abilities. As you may recall, we recommend more focus on developing proprioceptive skills and articulation, perceptual skills, and metalinguistic awareness. It is also important to provide concrete feedback in a timely manner with actionable steps that your students will be able to improve upon. This should help your students form a more favorable attitude towards learning English. In turn, they will become more engaged with the course material and its nuances, enabling them to become better equipped to take on more challenging learning tasks. Then overall, they will develop essential self-regulatory skills that can help foster learner autonomy and empowerment. So now in closing, the results do not allow us to definitively conclude that self-assessment had a positive effect on these segments. However, this does not mean that the added instruction through self-assessment does not benefit students in ways that were not measured in this study. Self-assessment may have positively influenced overall comprehensibility and intelligibility through better attention to super-segmentals, improved learner attitudes, and perception. So for future projects, we are looking at ways to refine our pre-test and post-test design by investigating learner self-monitoring and self-assessment strengths and challenges in more detail. Other ways of improving the experimental design include imposing time limits, adding delayed post-tests, or even eliciting extemporaneous speech. So to conclude, hopefully our research will help ESL teachers better support the pronunciation needs of their students. As students get better at knowing what to monitor and when, they'll become better at regulating their own learning and thus become more autonomous language learners. So finally, we would like to thank Jamie D'Imperio, Peter Enns, and Bo Zuger for their collaboration during the various stages of this research. And this project was funded by the Fonds de Recherche Société et Culture granted to Paul John. So we thank you for your attention and we welcome your questions.